And when he did kill, McCann argued, he was sane and even methodical. Dahmer would most often cruise for victims on Friday, so he would have the weekend to enjoy and dispose of the bodies. If he didn't meet someone on Friday, he wouldn't kill that week. Dahmer never attacked on the street, only in the controlled environment of his apartment. He never picked up anyone with a car, because he figured abandoned cars of missing persons would provide clues for police.
So he was a man that demonstrated consistently that when he wished to do it, he could control himself. Police asked him, "Mr. Dahmer, do you know what you're doing was wrong?" He said, "Well, absolutely. That's why I put double locks on the doors. That's why I had television cameras, as though that anyone broke in, that they would see, they'd leave before they discover the bodies."
It was never a question of whether or not he understood the wrongfulness of this kind. He knew what he was doing was wrong. The question was, was he able to stop it? I think as he progressed into this killing spree that he certainly got crazier and crazier. So basically I tried to argue that he was crazy certainly after about the 9th or 10th murder.
It was about that time, in the spring of 1991, that Dahmer began to experiment with the idea of creating a decorative altar of skulls. He never built the altar, but later sketched it for police. And it was also around the time he tried to give his victims crude lobotomies to create sex zombies who would never leave him.
To me, that is not a sane fantasy. That is not something coming from a person who has their psychological act together. It's coming from a person that has lost, really have stripped their gears of sanity and are now wallowing in some sort of a psychotic haze.
Psychiatrist Park Dietz testified for the prosecution. He feels that Dahmer was not the runaway train Jerry Boyle described, but as with most serial killers, one with Dahmer at the controls.
Nothing drives any of these men from fantasy to action, except themselves. They're in the driver's seat.
In his closing argument, Prosecutor McCann played on the issue of Dahmer's characteristic lying. McCann warned the jury not to be fooled.
He fooled the police in Bath, Ohio. He fooled the police when he had Hicks' body in his car. He fooled the Milwaukee police on the counteract Simpson Doan case. Ladies and gentlemen, he's fooled a lot of people, including the court that gave him a year's probation. Please, please, don't let this murderous killer fool you.
Jerry Boyle, however, offered a synopsis of Dahmer's life that portrayed a sick, out-of-control man.
Jeffrey Dahmer, as a total human being, a person who's into fantasy, drugging, keeping skulls in locker, cannibalism, having delusions, chanting and rocking, picking up roadkill, going and trying to get a mannequin home so he can play sex with a mannequin, posing people who are dead that he killed for pictures, masturbating all over the place. This is Jeffrey Dahmer.
Family members of victims tried to pass the time as the jury deliberated. It took less than a day to return a verdict.
In regard to the death of Ernest Miller, did the defendant Jeffrey L. Dahmer have a mental disease? Answer, no.
For every murder with which he was charged, Dahmer was found sane. At a press conference later, District Attorney McCann told reporters how happy he was that uncontrollable sexual urges had not been accepted as grounds for insanity.
We were all concerned of this emerging as a defense, not just in a murder case, but more likely in rape cases and child molesting cases.
At the sentencing hearing 2 days later, Judge Lawrence Graham allowed victims' families to tell both the court and Dahmer about the impact the crimes had made. It was one of the most emotional moments of the trial.
You took my 17-year-old son away from me. I'll never get a chance to tell him that I loved him. I'd have a chance to tell him that I loved him the last time I saw him, which will be a year tomorrow. Never, Jeffrey! Jeffrey! I hate you, mother! I hate you! This is out of control! Don't me, Jeffrey! I'll kill you! God damn it! Look at me, mother! What's your name, Pat?
Once order was restored, Dahmer, who never testified, addressed the court.
I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything. I know the families of the victims will never be able to forgive me for what I have done. I have seen their tears, and if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it. I am so very sorry.
Judge Graham then read the sentence.
Count 1, the court will impose the mandatory life sentence.
Dahmer received the maximum penalty for each and every count. But his story was far from finished. In fact, it began to take on a life of its own. Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the most publicized serial killers in history. But the fascination with such murders began more than a century ago. In London, between September and November of 1888, someone murdered and mutilated 5 prostitutes. The killer wrote letters to the police and the London Times, taunting them with clues of his next murder. He signed the letters, Jack the Ripper. The lasting appeal of the Ripper legend is that he stopped after 5 killings and was never caught. Jack the Ripper became a model for how the media portrays serial killers. Modern-day killers like Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, and Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, gained catchy nicknames in the press. Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, also wrote letters to the newspapers. Our dark fascination with serial murders has spilled into our entertainment, spawning some of the most popular movies ever made. Inevitably, as the Jeffrey Dahmer case grabbed worldwide attention, those with an eye to profit took the marketing of killers one step further. Serial killer trading cards, T-shirts, even a comic book exploited and glamorized the crimes.
I don't think my book will bother him as much as the fact that Dahmer was in the top 25 most intriguing people of 1991 for People magazine.
Serial killers are mostly intrigued by themselves. In fact, they are so self-centered that one source of ego fulfillment can be the body count. In August 1991, when Jeffrey Dahmer's case was one of the top stories in the country, police in Mississippi arrested Donald Leroy Evans for killing a 6-year-old girl. Soon, Evans confessed to nearly 60 killings across the country, causing just the kind of speculation a serial killer enjoys.
It involves enough bodies to make people forget almost what happened in Milwaukee.
But to date, very few of the murders Evans confessed to have been verified. With homicide rates soaring nationally in the last 30 years, serial killers may be losing some of their shock value. When William Herons killed 3 people in Chicago in 1945, it was called the crime of the century.
Herons only killed 3 people. And when I say only killed 3 people, by today's standard, you don't even get attention of the media unless you've knocked off about 12 or 15 people.
In fact, it's all too easy to watch the stories about serial killers unfold in our newspapers and on our TV screens. It's a safe titillation of the height of evil, as long as we keep a distance. The alternative is not to hear about the killings at all, as was the case in the old Soviet Union. Under communist rule, the press was strictly censored in reporting violent crime. As a result, Russians never knew that serial killers like Andrei Chikatilo were on the prowl. The self-proclaimed mad beast murdered 53 people in a 10-year spree. With the end of censorship, his 1992 trial received wide press coverage and left viewers in disbelief and shock. Milwaukee is a city still healing from the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer's apartment building was torn down about a year after the trial, erasing a painful landmark of his crimes. Then, on November 28, 1994, at the state prison in Portage, Wisconsin, Dahmer was sent on a bathroom cleaning detail with 2 other prisoners. When guards left the 3 unattended, one of the inmates, Chris Scarver, who called himself Christ, attacked both his fellow prisoners with a metal bar from a weight set. 2 hours later, Jeffrey Dahmer was pronounced dead at Divine Savior Hospital. The horror that one man brought upon an entire city is still difficult to comprehend.
There is no question in my mind that what Jeffrey Dahmer became was the embodiment of evil. I think that if we had lived in the Middle Ages, that would have been the defense. And a jury might have believed that, in fact, the devil took over his being and caused him to do these things.
Dahmer, of course, is evil. Dahmer knew it was wrong all the time. One of the reasons that he drank as he did the killings, I think was to silence his conscience, to dull his conscience. This isn't a man that didn't know right from wrong. He knew it was wrong, he knew it was evil.
The hardest thing for the public to accept is that these men view humans as so inferior to themselves that the death of another is trivial compared to the momentary pleasure of the killer. His orgasm is more valuable than your life.
I call him Halley's Comet. He's a total mystery. Comes around once every 75 years. Can't figure out why, but he's there, and thank God it's only once every 75 years.